It's a cool 27 degrees here in Abuja, just after a heavy storm in the capital city. Good morning and welcome to your daily dose of sunshine. I'm Maukwe Oguyusuf.
And I'm Ayo, marking it's 28 degrees here in Lagos, and it is the 15th day in the month of May, smack in the middle of the month, some would say. Welcome to the show. So, Mark, where are we going this morning?
Oh, well, we're going all the way. I don't know, I told you about our fascination with water bodies. There's another water body here, another skyline of a water body this morning. But this time all the way in Taraba State, northeast of Nigeria. For those who know, this happened a long time ago. I am just beginning to really contextualize just how old I am, yes. Taraba was carved out of old Gongola State. And this lake, this water body you're looking at, is called the Wuyo Lake in Ibi local government area of Taraba State. This lake is quite famous for the International Fishing Festival, which it hosts. Well, for some time that festival had not held, but recent times, with Governor Abu First trying to revitalize that particular festival. It held after a long while last year. So this is where that festival takes place, I say sometime around April, when the water levels might have gone down and it's safe for people to be able to explore the lake, which they also say is the largest in West Africa. Can you imagine that? This lake that you're looking at, the Wuyo Lake. Well, this is what we're bringing you this morning. The sights and sounds of water bodies around Nigeria. Ayo, aren't you fascinated by it?
More than fascinated. And at least for those who don't know, you've given us a tiny bit of history this morning. That one of the states carved out of the old Gongola state is Taraba. Okay, we'll find out what year that was. But to the issue that you talked about, the fishing festival, oh, most certainly. Channels Television reported the fishing festival of last year on April the 20th. It's still right there on our website. And it's usually a very, very crowded place during that fishing festival, with the canoes making, all of the moves around and all. And the extremely big fish are caught there. So, this is, as you said, a bit of Nigeria, and I'm just hoping that someone is taking up the gauntlet to challenge themselves to document Nigeria for posterity's sake. And there are many, many avenues via which these can be done. So please, ladies and gentlemen, this is Wuyo Lake in the EB local government area of Taraba State, taking a bit of history and a bit of our country.
Well, quite a lot to take in after you've been calmed down there. Another incident, well, I say, happened yesterday. Unprecedented, it would seem, in the history of our country. Very rarely do Nigerians get an apology after something has gone untoward, something really catastrophic has happened. Very rarely do government agencies take responsibility. But yesterday, we did see one government agency, or let's say parastatal now, under the Ministry of Education, the Joint Admissions and Matriculation Body, taking responsibility under its registrar, Professor Ishaq Oloyede. It was a moment that was quite emotional. It was laden with emotion. I don't think anyone saw the level of emotion that was going to come with the words that, he takes full responsibility coming. I don't know if you saw it, but I certainly didn't. And I also did not think that the review, because it was just a few days, or just yesterday, as a matter of fact, or 2 days ago, that JAMB released that committee, the panel that they had set up for their review. They did admit that they were going to take a look. That the complaints that had trailed the conduct of the 2025 UTME were quite a lot. And that perhaps these were no ordinary complaints, even though for them, from the results that had come out, they had seen nothing wrong with it, and they felt that, it was just following the trend that they had noticed in recent times. However, owing to the level and the vociferousness of the complaints that had come out, they said, okay, maybe it's time we take a second look, especially after a lot of people started to say, Jam, but you're not infallible. You know, you can make mistakes. The technology you deploy is not infallible. It's not foolproof. You know, there could have been glitches. So why don't you just do a second check? And Jam decided that it was going to do a second check and let people know that it was going to bring forward what usually happens months after it has conducted the exams for the year. They brought it forward. I had assumed, that this is me being a Nigerian, that this was going to take maybe at least a week or two before we get anything again. But in less than how many days, you know, we got this admission of error and glitches from the registrar, and he says he takes full responsibility. Now, for those wondering why the applause, why are people clapping, you know, this is something that has affected the lives, and if not that these students actually complained, you know, and as vehemently as they did, that this cannot be my results. This is not what I scored. I know the effort I put in. That Jam would have continued to insist that it did all that it could and it was right in its processes. But now that it has found it for an institution, because there are those who will say, well, an institution can actually find faults and they'll cover up. And there are those who actually had those kinds of doubts. Part of the questions we put out here yesterday was whether Jam will be willing, if it did find fault, to say, yes, there were faults, to admit it and to apologize to the students affected. Well, we saw that yesterday, and perhaps that explains the applause around the Jam registrar, you know, the fact that a public institution, a Nigerian public institution, can admit its faults, can listen to the public, take a review, admit that there were glitches, and, you know, apologize and, you know, see how it can remedy the situation for the number of students, 375,000 plus of them affected. The question will be, would that be all? Ayo, did you see this coming as quickly as we saw it yesterday?
Nope, I gotta be honest. I didn't see it coming this quickly. But you know, Markway, there's something that I've often talked about, and that is the word communication. Jam could simply have put out a statement, like, oh, okay, this happened, that happened, and they will say a statement by the registrar, Professor Ishaq Oloyede, said this, said that, without emotions and all. But and I've often said this, what should be spoken should not be limited to writing, and what should be written should not be limited to being spoken. And on this particular issue, the registrar didn't just send the PRO, didn't just send an officer. He came with his full chest to speak and say, I take responsibility for this. This is on me, this is at my table. And as you said earlier, Malcolm, it was like, you know, someone dropped the ball and another person is taking responsibility for it. This is the kind of accountability that I believe Nigerians will want, and this is the kind of accountability that I believe will build trust in public institutions. Malcolm, yesterday, as I was watching the news, the video, over and over again, I think I watched it like 2 or 3 times, I said to myself, I hope, and I know he will not want to come for any interview now, but I look forward to having a conversation with Professor Oloyede, just to ask exactly what was going through his mind. Because he may not have been the one that wrote the script. I mean, someone may have written the speech for him, as, you know, it normally happens, and of course he would have gone through it. What are the things that went through his mind before he came to the fore? What are the things that were going through his mind as he was reading that moved him so strongly? And he recognized, I mean, just listen to this speech. I gotta be honest with you, a good number of people have come out to say, man, this is the most critical critics. A friend of mine forwarded something someone wrote about Professor Oloyede to me, and it was very, very admirable. It is admirable that this will happen in Nigeria and by a Nigerian and not under a gunpoint. He took responsibility to do this by himself, even though defenses have come from far and near. So yes, maybe we can say that this is the kind of things Nigerians would want to see to help them build trust in their country once again, particularly in the education sector, Malcolm.
Well, I do hope that for the students, I know that it cannot be funny for them, to resit. Many times when you do an exam, especially one that raises your heartbeat as that of JAM, you really just want to do it one time. You put your best effort into it, and you want to get it out of the way.
Yeah.
And it's really a shame that this has happened to those students. I sincerely hope that this admission of JAM to the glitches and the errors that has caused the kind of results that they have seen, which they clearly know wasn't theirs, I hope it suits them enough and gives them the courage again to put as much effort and as much enthusiasm as they once had to resit those exams and come out in flying colors. And to JAM, I sincerely hope that they also put in a process. Maybe this review, which they do months after, should now come even, more quicker, so a little quicker, so that they can be sure that whatever it is that they do, that the students were fairly treated and they did not hold the short end of the stick in their processes. Because something our guest said yesterday, something Mr. Bosun Ayeni said yesterday, really struck me. He said this moment, has the opportunity, the opportunity to define the lives, the trajectory of the young people who will be affected by this. So I do hope that this will encourage them. I do hope that this will fire again the enthusiasm to realize that their future is indeed in their hands, and to, do the needful once more with the tenacity and the enthusiasm with which they did it. Ayo.
It's another lesson for the students themselves, because a friend was telling me of another institution in the country, now inside the institution, inside the university, that the students got a result and felt, no, this isn't what, I did better than this. And went and probed the process, and the process reviewed the results, and he got what he deserved. The point that I'm making here is, let Nigerians know that your voices will be heard. Our voices are being heard. Now, young people should get some strength from this. There is no point in shouting or protesting on this. That's the engagement is what matters here. Now, our voice has been heard here, and our voice can be heard in every area, every facet of life. For me, that is one of the lessons to take here. Let's not just keep silent and complain in our bedrooms. Let's come out, air our voices, and indeed, we will get the results that we want, because no one is going to build this nation for us, Malcolm.
I think that's a hope that a lot of Nigerians have, that their voices should be heard.
Yeah.
I think it has been the complaint over the years, and maybe that's why JAM really stands out as an example in this instance.
Absolutely.
Because the complaints from many Nigerians is that their voices are rarely ever heard.
Yes.
And oftentimes it has to get to violence before indeed the authorities now take note. So I'm hoping that other government institutions will take note from
Absolutely.
the example of JAM and say, we do not have to resort to violence first before you take note of what it is that people are saying.
Absolutely.
If they're saying I don't have electricity and you are supposed to provide electricity, by all means do so. If you don't have water and you're supposed to provide water, by all means do so. That is what government is supposed to be about. So
Absolutely.
On this one, kudos to JAM. Kudos, more importantly, to the students. I sincerely hope that when they do rewrite these exams, that they come out in flying colors. Well, we have to take a break at this time. When we come back, we're going to be looking at what Nigeria is doing in the area of trade and investment. That is our focus this morning. You have heard of Nigeria First. How is the Ministry of Trade and Investment pushing that to make sure that we are all tagging along and putting our country first? In just a moment, please stay with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, trust is the most valuable currency in governance. Without it, no reform will endure. The time for bureaucratic top wars is over. Nigeria's economic and social future depends on what we, the stewards of public institutions choose to do today. Our citizens are watching, our investors are waiting, and time is not on our side. We must move from policy to performance, from ambition to execution, from silos to synergy. This retreat and further engagements must birth a culture of action, accountability, and cross-agency collaboration. Our people, the people of the greatest black nation on earth, deserve efficient, transparent, and responsive public institutions.
Vice President Kashim Shettima there speaking at the retreat of the presidential initiative on the ease of doing business. Again, they were having a retreat and he was speaking to them. Well, this morning we have the privilege to speak with the Minister of Trade and Investment, who actually started from that presidential initiative on the ease of doing business. Her face was very prominent around championing the ease of doing business in Nigeria. And now she has a bigger platform to be able to push that agenda. Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, thank you so much for coming on the program this morning.
Pleasure, Malfred. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, so we are looking at industry, trade, and investment. Oftentimes when I look at this, it looks really big. It looks very complex. But essentially what we're looking for is investors coming into our country, even Nigerian investors, to be able to invest with ease, to facilitate trade. You could tell me if I'm wrong. This is my own journalistic impression of what your ministry is about. And of course, industry to also facilitate. In fact, industry comes before anything else, to facilitate the industries. And we keep talking about how Nigeria seems to be behind in that regard. But in recent times, the Federal Executive Council came up with the Nigeria First policy. They want everything we're doing in Nigeria, especially with the ministries, departments, and agencies, to put Nigerian businesses first. I want to imagine that will be a baby of your own ministry. Is that correct?
Indeed.
So how are you championing it?
So this is a remix. This is really Mr. President prioritizing and reminding the country to put Nigeria first. So you recall there was an executive bill on local content, and sometimes Nigerians and MDAs tend to forget that we should buy Nigerian first. I mean, this is in a global context. Everybody knows what trade rules are and preferentials. You're not really meant to discriminate, but just mentally understanding that you need to patronize what Nigerian industry, what Nigerian businesses are producing. We need to produce what we consume and consume what we produce. So the way that the global shift has positioned, Mr. President is reminding all of us, including the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, that champions made in Nigeria goods, that champions industrialization. As you correctly said, we want investment, whether it's domestic or foreign investment, which leads to productivity. It's invested in economic activity that leads to trading and preferably export to generate more income and investment. So that's the cycle.
Well, so in that regard, what are you going to be? Because I know when you were at PEBEC, and I know that I'm sure you still have one little eye on PEBEC and say, how are you guys doing there? You had a way of measuring how it was that government agencies were aiding or constituting themselves into roadblocks. Is that they were aiding it or they were not aiding it? You know, you had a way of measuring that. You came up with parameters to do that. Are you going to be able to come up with parameters to see how government agencies are either following this policy or are not?
Well, we already are. Nothing has really left since PEBEC Executive Order 1, you recall, which is now the Business Facilitation Act. Every ministry, department, and agency is tracked under that, including the agencies under the Federal Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment. So that forms part of our performance matrix on our CDCU deliverables for Mr. President. So that's still ongoing. I've lost my...
That's okay.
Yeah, okay. So that's still ongoing, and we continue to track that. We continue to make sure that it's progressively easier. You know, I can't just leave my bias. So now that we're on the other side, we need to make sure. And our performance has actually been increasing as a ministry.
Okay, so how are you able to measure that?
It's the CDCU, the Central Coordinating Delivery Unit. They actually measure us quarter on quarter.
Oh, yes, the one led by Ms. Bala Usman.
Exactly.
Bala Usman.
Yeah.
Okay, so while that is there, what I was actually hoping to, hear is the one that looks at I don't know whether you have like an overview, because if this is your baby, this issue of Nigeria First, and you are championing industry, trade and investment, and you want to see more ministries, departments and agencies spend more of their capital or maybe recurrent on the Nigerian economy, I'm sure that there must be a way to track that.
Okay, so I'll tell you how it goes. The first thing is the procurement process. So government is like a really big spender in Nigeria. So Mr. President has said that the procurement process must be streamlined and simpler for Nigerian businesses to be able to have patronage from government. That's the first thing. The second thing is to be conscious when we're making our procurement and buying things to make sure that we have exhausted all possible local options, made in Nigeria options, before buying other options. That's the second thing. And the third thing is now the regulatory and bureaucratic landscape, making sure that, so for instance, we're hosting a domestic investors summit next month, and that's to speak to the middle cadre. You know that we've been working with MSMEs for quite a long time. So from starting a business to paying taxes, bringing transparency and efficiency through the use of technology. We've also worked on the Platinum Business Champions. Those are the companies that gross over $1 billion per annum USD, and focusing on they're the champions of this economy and have a whole value chain. And now we're deep diving into that middle cadre. A lot of them are manufacturers, a lot of them are industrialists, and they have an ecosystem of customers, of suppliers. And so what affects them? And they are the ones going to lead this country in African Continental Free Trade Area in terms of scaling across the continent. So we have to work on their regulatory challenges, their bureaucratic challenges, and indeed it's not just talk. We've already started working. The single window project is already going on. We've been discussing the export expansion grant. We've been discussing how to access single-digit credit in this economy. Those are the issues that matter to them.
There's a lot that you have listed, but the part I quickly wanted to highlight is the issue of procurement. What areas would you be, telling ministries, departments, and agencies to look closely at where they can patronize Nigerian goods?
Well, made in Nigeria products are growing by the day. Whether from automotive, we have our CNG, we have our assembled in Nigeria. So whether it's even from hard infrastructure or hard, requirements like automobile requirements, from furniture to services, a lot of made in Nigeria services are doing really well. So it's being intentional about it. So for instance, and this is not just a government thing, the policy that Mr. President read out is for all Nigerians at this time to be conscious to put Nigeria first in our dressing, in what we eat, in where we go, going on holiday in country, spending money in country. It's just a lifestyle. It's an intentionality that we all have to be well alert to at this time.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking this is because it had come before, this policy, not under this administration, prior to this time, and it would seem that a lot of Nigerians are like, yeah, you go first. We're not seeing you, government, do that for us. I do know that, I think it was, in this, the 10th National Assembly, part of the criticisms for them was that when they were buying their vehicles, it did not seem like they were looking at locally made vehicles. Yet, Nigerians were being told to buy local. So it would seem that sometimes government says something, but it doesn't seem to have that push to,
which
follow,
is
to lead
why
by
Mr.
example.
President is making this statement and making it a policy and going to be watching and making sure that everybody does this. It's now up to the BPP and up to all the tenders, boards and committees to enforce this. And also for Nigerian businesses to look at the budget. Where are the opportunities to work with government and to aggressively not assume that everything is already sorted out. There's this presumption that I've heard over years. Companies don't bother to tender because they think government already, but it's not true. Like with Pebex, so many vendors that we never knew just by their services have delivered. And so we also want people to trust the system and to get their compliance documentation, to be informed what is needed to go through the procurement process with government, have all their documentation in place, pay their taxes, and trust the process.
It's interesting. I mean, we're living in a very interesting world today because here we are. I mean, I think now we're here Nigeria First, but we did also hear America First. I think it was President Donald Trump that, came up with that particular mantra, make America great again and America First. So we're all in a world whereby it would seem that we're supposed to live within international rules, which countries themselves agree to adopt. But in recent times, it would seem that countries are now beginning to look out for themselves. Yet, more and more we see that we need inter-cooperation for us to be able to make progress. So, for instance, Nigeria has now signed up to the AFCFTA, and in the middle of all of that, we're also saying we want to promote ourselves first. Do you think that there is an oxymoron here, where on the one hand, we want to do more trade and more business, but on the other hand, we want to protect our own?
So, what I would say is interesting. There's now so much interconnectivity that it's really almost impossible to be a silo in this global village. So when we talk about businesses and buying Nigeria first, we're really talking about businesses operating within Nigeria. And some of them may be completely foreign owned. That's the first thing. And then Nigeria is very, very, very interconnected and vested in Africa. You know statistics, CBN released just recently, 24% of non-oil exports year-on-year increase. And our exports to the rest of Africa has trumped the rest, well, pardon the pun, has overtaken our exports to the rest of the world. So the Nigeria story is the Africa story. And Nigeria needs to lead and support Africa. So when we talk about Nigeria first, I would dare say Africa first. And it's just about being our own actualization, not waiting for anyone to come and rescue us or our economy or economies. And what's good for Nigeria is really good for Africa. So I would expand that to really an Africa first, led by Nigeria, of course.
Okay. Well, let me go to Lagos now before Ayo puts my head on a chopping block. Ayo, it's over to you now.
To be a made in Nigeria thing to do, Maokwe. But, Dr. Oluwole, it's good to see you. I have to note that you are wearing made in Nigeria, you are wearing green and white. So forgive the two of us for not wearing green and white with you this morning. But, I will stay there on that green and white thing. As far back as I can remember, maybe I'm also exposing myself here. I remember, in the Babangida days, it was like a kind of agenda to facilitate everything in Nigeria. I mean, when in the 90s, early 90s, it was like something that was championed by government at the time, Better Life program, and so many other initiatives, even in this Fourth Republic. All of that efforts have been made, but it would seem like there's usually some power blocks, whether in government or out of government, that kind of frustrate that process. For instance, there are those who said, look, the only way to make sure that this electricity challenge we have is killed is to make sure that no one imports generators, because generators are not made in Nigeria largely. So in your own opinion, madam, what are the challenges of that pronouncement or policy of government? And how do you think we can circumvent it as a nation? The Nigeria First policy, what are its challenges, and what do you think we need to do?
That's a hydra-headed question, and I'll try to unpack it. In international trade, you're looking at a very complex system. We can start from the global terrain with multilateral trade with the WTO and the rules that Nigeria has acceded to with the most favored nation. We can come down to Africa, the African Continental Free Trade Area, come even to the sub-regional level, ECOWAS, where I'm actually hosting the ministers responsible for trade and industry from this afternoon, today and tomorrow, here in Abuja. And then, of course, Nigeria, made in Nigeria goods, and how we deal bilaterally with other countries. It is the spirit and the intention. I wouldn't speculate on vested interest and cabals and all that. But this administration, everybody has seen it from day one, subsidy gone, unification of the Naira. These are areas where people have commented for a long time about vested interest, reform of NNPC. So Mr. President has the courage and he has the determination. So when he makes a statement like this about calling government first and then the whole of the country to be intentional about patronizing made in Nigeria goods, it's not just rhetoric. The reason is that patronizing anything made around here creates jobs, keeps our balance of trade steady, and also does not deplete our foreign exchange and our reserves. So it's an intentionality, and what do we do with that? Starting with government, I mentioned automotives. You know, there's a CNG project. You know that the government has actually led with buses, and Mr. President has actually delivered on that promise of let us do this and let us start doing this. It speaks to a wider sustainability challenge and energy security and all that. But just speaking to that as one example. Another example is just anything that Nigerian businesses or businesses in Nigeria, so I would cascade it perhaps in concentric circles. You buy Nigerian, internally we support our domestic investors, and I even focus particularly in helping those businesses to export to the rest of Africa and export to the rest of the world, market access, because that brings in that much needed foreign exchange. And then we go to the sub-region, ECOWAS. What is the trade between ECOWAS countries, Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria and Ghana? We have a lot of trade. How do we facilitate that trade? Then we go whole regional, AFCFTA. Nigeria has been named co-champion of digital trade for AFCFTA. We just launched our digital directory, the first of its kind, stating where Nigerian techpreneurs want to go. And the 5 countries popped out of that. A lot of trade with Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa. Also very interested in Egypt and Rwanda. So these are empirical details on how Consume Nigeria is not even just only about local and domestic consumption. It's also about investing in businesses and letting those businesses champion and scale out of Nigeria and across the world. So it's a mentality and an intentionality beyond just speaking.
Interesting, madam. Another thing that comes to mind about that, and it's really admirable, sincerely, well-meaning Nigerians, well-thinking Nigerians would think in that direction, ensuring that, look, let's patronize Nigeria to make Nigeria great again, so to speak. But I also recall something Professor Akinwumi Adesina, the president of the African Development Bank, said recently, well, not in recent time, but quite a little while ago, that sometimes, importing goods into Nigeria, imported goods are cheaper on the shelves than the ones that are made in Nigeria. And that, I'm sure you would recall, is a challenge. So how do we circumvent that? Because everybody wants to save as much liquid cash as possible.
That's a really good question, and that is a responsibility that behoves on all of us. So this speaks to productivity and competitiveness. We know some of the infrastructure deficits, cost of capital. We know some of the challenges in the business climate and regulatory space that make it difficult or less than easy for businesses to thrive. And you know that for nearly a decade, I was working on that, progressively making it easier to do business in Nigeria with some level of impact. Now, imported goods can be cheaper, and if Nigerians are not careful, if we're not intentional about it, we can become a dumping ground in this global terrain of other countries looking for where to export their goods to if it's more difficult to enter the US market, which is the largest consumer market in the world. So we have to also be intentional about it as a national priority to consume, even if it's slightly more expensive, knowing that this is a self-survival thing. Now, for businesses operating in Nigeria, and that's why I mentioned the Domestic Investors Summit, we need to support them and solve those problems for them so that they can get more productive and more competitive by the day. We also need to market their goods and help them with market access into other markets so that those goods can be exported, which will also give us much needed foreign exchange. So the work is clear, and what needs to be done is clear, and we just have to do it. There's just no shortcut. But it's just to say that in terms of, for instance, looking at the tariff structure that Nigeria is involved in, sometimes the inputs attract a higher tariff than the finished goods. So we're looking at reviewing. I've heard comments from a number of sectors, pharmaceutical sector, different sectors have spoken about how some of the tariff regimes, so those are some of the reforms that we're looking in from our end.
And I'm also glad that along with that, is something that Markwe asked you earlier, which you also spoke to, your work with micro, small, and medium enterprises in the country to facilitate their capacity to produce more, in country. And I know also that because if some of these raw materials are not available in country, if some of the major things that they need to use in the country are not available in country, naturally the products themselves are going to be expensive on the shelves. So that speaks perhaps to the kind of collaboration that has to happen between your ministry and other ministries like solid minerals, like steel, and the rest of them. How is that, coming up? And maybe even finance as well, because the tax bills, for instance, have also gone through quite some length. So how are those things all shaping up to help this agenda of producing, or rather industrializing Nigeria on an incremental basis?
It's shaping up very well indeed, actually. When you look at the Renewed Hope 8-point agenda, you would see this ministry under item number 7, accelerating diversification, and you would see a cluster of other industries, including communication, innovation, and digital economy, including arts and tourism and creative economy. We also work with, for instance, Minister of Health on his healthcare manufacturing project under the presidency. And so there's several interfaces across the government. This ministry is an enabler. And so supporting MSMEs in productivity and competitiveness. Sometimes things like packaging are expensive. And while we really want to support local production, because if we don't get some of these things right, it will continue to affect. It will continue to have a balance of trade that is not favorable to help them to scale. So as they perfect their products, but for instance, what we're doing to support them, and why I'm so bullish about exports and why I'm so bullish about competitiveness and playing at a regional and global stage, is because Nigerian products are in more demand than we can ever imagine. We'll be releasing soon and presenting formally to the private sector a market intelligence tool that we worked on with the support of UNDP that tracks Nigerian goods, the demand for Nigerian goods in Southern and Eastern Africa. So this is a research that is empirical and just supports businesses to know, hey, if my shea butter cosmetics are in demand, if my fashion, if the wigs I make, if the slippers I make are in demand in South Africa or in Lesotho, in East Africa, wherever it is, and so they can go straight to those markets under AFCFTA terms. So that's what it means to go from policy to performance, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Interesting, madam. I want to speak to participation, rather, cooperation or partnership with states. Let me give one example which I hope you will be able to use to catalyze the conversation. So we are aware that a good number of leather used in making what they call Italian shoes, Italian leather, all come from Nigeria, from 1 or 2 states. Now, if we were to champion and say, you know what, let's own this, what kind of activities or collaboration needs to happen between your ministry or maybe the federal government and the states to ensure that industrialization, particularly in that space, in livestock development and leather manufacturing or whatever, really does happen within the states, not just at the federal and state level, but even, I don't know, you speak to that, for instance, along several others.
Yeah, so that's a great question in the sense that all businesses are domiciled in the states. You will know from my track record with PEBEC, we work extensively with subnational governments. So for instance, now with the Central Coordinating Committee of the AFCFTA implementation, domestication, and pushing for exports, the Nigerian Governors Forum is a member of that committee. There are members from the Office of the Vice President on that committee because of the National Economic Council. And we work extremely well. The leather example you've given, there's tanneries in Kano that are enjoying facilities from Bank of Industry. So that's exactly what, in terms of market access, in terms of standards, however we can support them. And so I've already had some interactions with that particular demographic of businesses. But again, those are the medium-sized businesses that are industrializing, that are that need to be supported in increasing their productivity, in increasing their competitiveness, in increasing their export readiness, market access and standards, and that is the granular practical work that we're doing.
One last one from me before, again, Malfoy retaliates. There's something they call elite consensus. And we have heard a minister of agriculture in this country tell us that some people would import something as measly as pizza from any part of the world and bring it into Nigeria. They import pizza per meal. Now, that speaks to the capacity or the capacity to afford those things. And then, so if Nigerians are seeing people of means not patronizing stuff that are made in Nigeria for one reason or the other, it speaks to whether or not they themselves cannot aspire to get to that level. So is there a conversation that you think should happen to form an elite consensus and patronize Nigeria to make Nigeria greater?
Certainly, and this is the conversation that Mr. President is leading by charging the government first and the whole of the country to patronize made in Nigeria goods. I've said for a long time that there's no problem with wanting to eat apples as long as we're exporting as many mangoes as possible. But on a serious note, we all have to have a sense of responsibility on how we use our scarce foreign exchange and what we spend it on, and just what we consume. And that's a personal choice. It's called leading from the front and leading personally by your own conviction. So that's why I make the point that it's not a government-only conversation. Indeed, you're right. The elite need to lead. When the leaders lead, the followers follow. And what we are able to consume and produce in large enough numbers and in quality that the rest of the world wants, and also we want. I remember how offended people were by the concept of importing Gary, and that is the kind of righteous indignation that we should have, that never should something so basic to our economy be consumed or be imported into this country. Rather, we should see ourselves as exporters. We should see ourselves as giving our quality made in Nigeria products to the rest of Africa and to the rest of the world. That is who we are. Our entrepreneurs are extremely dynamic, extremely creative and innovative, especially layering technology on their e-commerce and digital trade in services. And we need to support them in market access and opportunities to scale.
Indeed. I mean, it's very interesting that you mentioned the fruit, a very popular fruit now, apples, which we all think, which a foreigner might actually assume grows in Nigeria, with the manner in which
just some, but
yes,
yes.
A very little fraction of that
yes.
grows in Jos.
Yeah.
And even now we understand grapes are beginning to grow in Kaduna, even though we're not sure that we see it on Nigerian shelves and telling us that these grapes were actually made and produced in Nigeria. And we're looking forward to that. But while we're looking forward to those kinds of things, we know that a lot of what the fruits, those apples and grapes, are actually imported into the country. And things as basic as that, they actually suck up a lot of our foreign exchange. But I can understand as a mom, while apples might be preferable to mangoes.
But I will tell you that the apples are sometimes coated with chemicals. You need to think about carcinogenics. You need to think about organic, what is fresh, what is natural.
That's another angle to look at it from. But when you're looking about going to the market 500 times in 1 week, you just figure, look, let's just buy this. It will last a while. But, I mean, just looking at the things from the point of view of a Nigerian mom, away from that. I want to take a look at exports, because really we want to be able to export whatever it is that we grow here. And I think it's up to the ministry, and not just the Ministry of Trade, but also the Ministry of Agriculture, because I know that some countries have invested in a research that makes fruits and vegetables last longer on the shelves. We live in the tropics, and we also know that our climate doesn't exactly aid the lasting of fruits on our shelves. Even the transport, I think the Federal Executive Council has discussed that a lot of times as to why the prices of our foods are high. From farm to market, the transporting, the logistics, just takes a huge chunk. But in spite of that, some Nigerian entrepreneurs are taking the bulls by the horn and still saying, we want to export our products. And they've come up with, some challenges have confronted them. And you have spoken to some of those challenges. You've talked about pesticides compliance, etc., etc. You told them that you're here to serve them, and you hear them in terms of some of the complaints that they have made with the challenges that they face. What exactly would you say has him? I know you've only been in office for 6 months, thereabouts, but how would you say, in the middle of all of the traveling that you have to do in between, that your ministry has been able to help them face this challenge, to be able to overcome them?
So this is work that has been ongoing and continues to be ongoing, particularly with exports of agricultural products. So there are a number of things. I'll speak first to infrastructure. The National Single Window Portal, which is a soft infrastructure that makes it just seamless, more transparent and efficient. That project has eluded Nigeria for at least a decade that I've been around. But Mr. President last year inaugurated a committee chaired by the executive chair of FIRS in his capacity of special advisor on revenue generation. And already we see that project is well on the way. Crimson Logic is a technical partner. They're the leaders in the world. And so Nigeria is now having a national single window. So that enables ports facilitation, so trade facilitation in the infrastructure bit, in addition to rail and road projects that are going on across the country. That would be another second bit in terms of infrastructure. Then logistics business, cold chain. We're trying to attract some investors. I just had a conversation with Japanese government officials actually on Tuesday in Abidjan about cold chain technology and just bringing investors that can support Nigeria on that. Japan does quite well on that. And so that conversation is ongoing. We're identifying a pilot state, probably somewhere in the middle belt, that we can see how we can support small businesses. But what has actually happened, which is not aspirational, is that we've been working with the sesame and cowpea producers. We've been working with several of those, also cocoa, supporting them. Sesame had a bit of a challenge with some of the paracats. There's a particular chemical that local farmers use. So in terms of advocacy, in terms of, we've done a surveying with WTO and International Trade Organization, just supporting technically to get past that. We've been in discussion with the government of Japan. About 40% of Japan's sesame imports come from Nigeria, even more than that to China. And so market access conversations coming back, engaging with Nigerian Customs Service, Standards Organization, and farmers to make sure that we have zero rejects. So NEPC leads that conversation, supported in policy by the ministry and the political support. So these are the types of interventions that we do to make sure that there's market access for Nigerian agricultural products around the world.
So for Nigerians who are watching you this morning, especially Nigerian business people who are saying, oh, Ministry of Trade and Investment, how does it impact my business? How would you say that they can look forward to the impact of the Ministry of Trade, Industry, Trade and Investment on their businesses?
I would take it in 3 buckets. Investment mobilization, where the chief sort of led by Mr. President, attracting investment, and that's in twofold. The first one will be investment retention, making sure that big capital in Nigeria is reinvesting and is staying in Nigeria. That's the first one. The domestic investors are comfortable and private, which speaks to regulatory challenges. And then investment attraction, all the reforms at the macro level, the fiscal level, the tax bill, the monetary level, FX issues and availability. That again is investment attraction. And selling to the world the priority sectors, agribusiness, mining, digital trade, all the areas that businesses from around the world are looking at, infrastructure in Nigeria's economy. Then the second bit, how we support, is the trade policy, a lot of G2G, discussing with new governments. We've been discussing with governments in the Middle East, UAE, Qatar, Saudi, to galvanize investment into the country. We've also been looking at other markets, Brazil, India, China, along with our traditional strategic partners across the EU and the US. So those policies, making sure they're in place, our AFCFTA domestication, that's another bit. And the third bucket I would list would be supporting exports, the domestication, the support, the trade facilitation, working with customs, working with SON, working with NAFDAC, working with the free zones, what are the incentives and the structures, the export expansion grant, reforming that. Those are things that impact businesses and their bottom lines. And this is based on feedback. So we are definitely supporting exports, because that is really what our economy needs to be balanced. And so I would take those 3 buckets. There's granular work under each of those that is already ongoing, and that speaks definitely to the bottom line of businesses. I told you we've stratified businesses. There's the MSMEs and what we do for them and what we have done for them for a while. We've taken the platinum businesses and their unique challenges, and now my focus is squarely on the medium to larger size enterprises and domestic investors in Nigeria.
Well, Dr. Jumoke Oduwole, we hope to catch up with you, as you progress in your work as Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment. We have to thank you very much for coming on Sunrise Daily this morning, and we wish you a very successful hosting of the ECOWAS trade ministers. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Daily. Dr. Jumoke Oduwole is the Minister for Industry, Trade and Investment. Well, we've come to the end of today's program. We hope that you have some feedback, so please send them to the handles you can see on your screen. I hope they're popping up. Well, thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogunyusi.
And I'm Ayo Makinde. Enjoy the rest of your day.